to Living by Faith with Trillia Newbell. I am so glad to be here. It's your bright spot to your Saturday morning, and I'm Trillia. It is a joy to get to come Saturday after Saturday and think about the things of God. That's what we do here on Living by Faith. My hope is that we will take God at His word and live our lives accordingly. So we want to know the word, live by the word, enjoy the word. And it's only by the grace of God that we're able to do any of this. So I'm so grateful for that. So I am in a season of fasting and prayer for Lent. It has been such a great time, and I've been really grateful for it. It has been a good reminder to me of my need for Jesus every day. I know I need him, but when I experience the slight pains of hunger, which again, it's slight. I know that there are so many people who are experiencing really hard things. So, but when I do experience it, I am reminded to pray. I want to live my life like this at all times. Just this reminder to pray without ceasing, to remember Jesus and to walk with him. But this season has also reminded me of the words of Jesus in Matthew 6. So I want to read some of it over you. Let's listen as I read God's word. Jesus said, "Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Thus, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you." Jesus continues, "And when you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and in the street corners, that they may be seen by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think that they will be heard for their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him." And then, of course, Jesus goes on to teach the Lord's Prayer. But then in verse 16, he says, "And when you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces, that their fasting may be seen by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, that your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you." Oh, we want to and we ought to fast, pray, all of these things. But the point isn't to draw attention to ourselves. In other words, it's not for public consumption or recognition. All praise is fleeting, but the Father's approval is eternal and everlasting. We already have his approval through his Son. Praise God for that. But then we get to verse 19. "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in your you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, For either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. There's so much to unpack in these verses, and we are not going to be able to do them here. But one thing is true for all of them: our treasure is in heaven. Whether it's looking for the praise of others, so we fast or pray, or whether it's living our lives in such a way that we are invested in only earthly things, none of these things will satisfy, and they are not the aim of the Christian life. Our hearts, emotions, focus are so often on these earthly things, but the Lord helps us to turn our focus, our gaze on the eternal. God could not God could be calling us to sacrifice. And I believe he is always calling us to sacrifice one way or another. Our sacrifice, whether it's with money or with food or through prayer, is not to earn God's favor. We already have it. However, it often does reveal where our treasure lies. It does, doesn't it? Like how we are sacrificing it kind of is revealing sometimes. Here's my question to you this morning. Where has it been tough for you to sacrifice? That's one question. The other one is, what motivates you to sacrifice? Has it been for the praise of others? Has it been because you think that if you sacrifice, then God will give you something, which is not accurate? It's not biblical. One of the hardest topics for pastors is to preach on this sacrifice of money. And it is, every single time I've heard a pastor begin to talk about money, they usually say, okay, I know this is a hard thing to talk about, and then they start to talk. Or, okay, guys, there's like this walking on eggshells thing. It's a tough topic, it seems. But if our focus is on Jesus, I think we can do it. That's why I'm so glad that we have Ron Sellers on today to kind of help us refocus our minds and help us to think biblically through this idea of giving and sacrifice. Ron Sellers is the founder and president of Gray Matter Research and Consulting, a firm that regularly serves Christian ministries, denominations, and churches to solve their information needs. Ron has helped hundreds of organizations, including the U.S. Army, the American Red Cross, and Compassion International, among many others. Ron, welcome to the show.
I appreciate it. Good to be here.
Yes, and so I started the show talking really about what I'm doing right now through Lent and sacrificing, and mine is through food. That's what I am currently doing. But giving and money in general is something that is hard to sacrifice and hard to talk about. And so your firm has done recent research on, and I believe your research, you've called it the giving gap. And what is it that your organization does? And can you tell us more about this research that you've done?
Sure. Well, Gray Matter Research and Consulting is what the name implies. It's a research firm, and our specialty over the years has been working with Christian ministries, with denominations, with parachurch ministries, et cetera, helping them understand, helping them get answers to their pressing questions. So for a ministry, it might be, our giving is down, what's going on? Or it might be, our giving is up sharply, what's going on? Lots and lots of different questions that we help them answer. We do that through basically, one way or another, talking with their constituents, whether that be their current donors, their target population, Christians in general, whatever that may be. The giving gap that you referenced is a study that we did in conjunction with Infinity Concepts, which is a firm that takes a lot of the information that we generate and turns that into action for their clients. through marketing design, through strategic planning, and things like that. And so this particular study, we were looking at the giving of evangelical Christians. And one of the challenges that a lot of researchers have, especially when they talk about a Christian population, is they look at church and charitable giving as basically being the same thing. It's all giving, right? Well, we know that church giving and charitable giving can be two very, very different things. So we always look at them separately, and then we're able to combine that information and look at the overall giving picture. But we were looking to figure out, among the evangelical Protestant population, what is giving really like? And especially, how does giving today compare to a study that we did back in 2021 about giving? Is it higher? Is it lower? Is it progressing in certain areas, et cetera? So that's why we partnered with Infinity Concepts on this, and that's what the study is all about.
And so we only have a minute 40 before the break, so I don't want to get too deep into it, but can you tell us what your findings were? Well, let's hold on that question. I imagine if there's a giving gap, that means that there's people aren't giving as much. And so I do want to in a minute, when we come back, I want us to talk through what your research found and the reasons behind it, because I do believe that there's been just a lot of shifts since COVID-19, and I don't know if that's the shift or what it is, but I imagine that a lot of people are either for political reasons or the economy or inflation, they're not giving as much, and so I am interested to know, and also interested to know if this is giving to local churches only or giving in general. But we're going to touch on all of that and so much more with Ron Sellers when we come back. We are going to think through how we can give and where we can give. More when we return. Welcome back to Living by Faith with Trillia Newbell. I am talking with Ron Sellers. He is the founder and president of Gray Matter Research. And we were just about to get into the research that you did, the giving gap changes in evangelical generosity. Okay, so let's cut to the chase. What did you discover? What is it that has happened?
Well, it's frankly not pretty. Since we did this for the first time in 2021, we have seen evangelical giving drop. It's dropped significantly. It's dropped among almost every type of evangelical, and it's dropped in multiple ways. The number of evangelicals who are giving has fallen. The amount that those are still giving has fallen. And it's fallen whether we talk about church or giving outside of church to charities, ministries, whatever that may be. So no matter how we define it, it has dropped significantly over the past 3 years. And to be perfectly blunt, it wasn't that great to begin with. So it's gone from pretty bad to much worse.
So why do you think this is, that there is, especially among evangelicals, a giving desert? Like there are people who are just no longer giving.
Well, first, let me just quote you a couple of numbers to give everybody a sense of exactly where things stand. We had in 2021, we found that 19% of evangelical Protestants had not given a penny over the past 12 months to either church or charity. Today, that is up from 19% to 31%. So basically a third of evangelicals are not giving at all. And I'm sure you've heard, maybe you've even talked about the various definitions of tithe, and should it be on the gross or on the net? Should it be to the local church? Should it be as any kind of giving count as tithing? All those kinds of questions. And my position on that is, in some ways, it's immaterial because the vast majority of evangelicals are not even remotely close to a tithe. About 10% of evangelicals are giving what we could consider to be a tithe, meaning 10% of their income. So that kind of sets the stage for where things are. Now, in terms of why, there are all kinds of possible reasons for this. One certainly is the economy. We have had significant inflation over the past few years. There's a lot of economic uncertainty today. There has been for a while. But, we've gone through this. We probably could have had this discussion in 1960 and 1920, and we would be saying, there are wars and rumors of wars and political uncertainty and who's going to be the president, what's he going to do, and all this kind of stuff. One of the things that we have found through our research, and it doesn't really talk to why it's dropped over the past 4 years, but it does talk about why it is slow, is most people have very little idea of what they actually give. The Christian church talks about the tithe. And when we ask people, what percentage of your income do you give away? The average estimate was over 8%. Now, which is pretty close to a tithe. When we ask people, how much money did you actually give away? And it's the same exact people that we asked about the percentage. The answer, when we calculate it according to their household income, is closer on average to about 2%. So people think percentage-wise they're giving about 4 times as much as they actually are giving. So
Now
when
that's interesting.
when churches talk about tithes, if you already think you're getting, on average 8%, well, you're pretty close to that 10%, so you're not doing too badly. But talking about percentages, that's not how people think. That's not how people think about their finances. You don't write a check or get your credit card out to give 1% of your income for groceries this week. You write a check for $230 or whatever it is. So my thought on this is that there needs to be some rethinking of how we talk about tithing, if tithing is even going to become a relevant topic again within the Christian church.
Now, that is really fascinating. So would you say then that it's not necessarily intentional, but it is a misunderstanding of math, maybe, or just what percentages are?
Yeah, I
or
don't
budgeting?
want to.
Go ahead. Yes, I was just saying, or budgeting. I think that there could be a misunderstanding of budgeting, math, and not this intentional holding on. I don't know. What do you think? Oh, I think I lost Ron. Well, we are going to get Ron back on the line, but I will say that that is fascinating to me because I have not heard or considered the idea that it could just be a knowledge gap. But that makes complete sense to me, that there could be something that we just don't know. And that is a part of what we do here at Living by Faith, is we're going to help think through biblical ideas and think through and gain understanding so that we might know what to do. And I think that for my family, I'm grateful to know that we try to we have a budget, and we try to look at our budget. And when we are looking at our budget, my husband, who is better at this than I am, that is how we're going to determine, okay, this is what we should give and what we can give. And yeah, I think that's part of it, is looking at your budget and asking, okay, where is it that you can give and can sacrifice? I started the show talking about sacrifice. And I'd love for us to think through what it is that we have sacrificed or could sacrifice in light of this season of Lent that we are in. You can give me a call at 877-548-3675 or 877 live 675. Give me a call. I'd love to talk to you about your what the Lord might be calling you to sacrifice. Again, it's 877-548-3675 or 877 live 675. So before I open the phone lines, Ron, we were talking about how maybe some of the giving and not giving is because of just a lack of knowledge. Ron, are you back with us?
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm sitting here in the middle of a terrible storm, so I think communications have become a little spotty.
No worries. Well, I would love to dive into whether you think there is a knowledge gap, because that to me is really interesting, that sometimes people don't give because they think they're doing more than they are. So what do you think?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. I certainly think when the pastor is up front talking about tithing or talking about giving, and if he's talking about percentages, the typical person is thinking, I'm doing okay. I'm pretty close to that. I think I'm giving around 5%, 8%, 10%, 15%, whatever. The other thing that contributes to that is we know from our research that a lot of people do not plan their giving. They don't give the same amount each month. They give spontaneously. They give. Some people will say it's when I see something that really makes me feel like I need to give. Other people will talk about the leading of God's Spirit, when to give, et cetera, but they don't plan. So, we've talked to people, when we do this very often, when we talk to ministry donors that we know have not given to that ministry for over a year. And people will say, but I just gave last month. But I just gave 2 months ago. People really don't have a good handle on their finances overall, and they really don't have a good handle on their giving. So there definitely is part of it that is lack of awareness. There's also part of it that is just not a willingness to make a financial sacrifice. That people are saying, the job, if I lose my job, I need to have this much set in reserve. I'm going to save for my kids' college. I've got this lump in my arm. I don't know if I'm going to need medical treatment. Where's the economy going? And so or it's something as simple as, but I like that sweater. I know I can't afford it, but I really like it, so I think I'll buy it. And then there's no money left over for giving. So it is a combination of different factors.
Well, I that to me makes a lot of sense, that there is. I do wonder if there is also fear that plays a role in this. I don't know how your research or where your research goes, but I do wonder if some of it is a holding on in fear. Did you think of the psychology? Did your research ask questions about what people are thinking when they're giving?
No, we didn't. And one of the main reasons is that a lot of people truly don't know what motivates them. They don't really understand their own motivations and actions. The story that I tell is, you think about the 50-year-old divorced guy who buys a Porsche, and that he tells you about the gas mileage and the warranty and everything else. But down deep inside, there's a part of him saying, I look good in this car. Now, he'll never admit that to himself. He'll never admit that to anybody else, but that's part of the motivation. So most people really don't understand their own motivations, which makes it very hard for researchers to measure those motivations.
Well, that makes sense to me. Our phone lines are open and they are lighting up. Give us a call at 877-548-3675 or 877 live 675. We'd love to hear from you. There's two questions that I really would love to know. One is, what have you been sacrificing lately? That's one question. The other question I'm interested in is, why why maybe haven't you? What is it that's holding you back from giving? 877-548-3675 or 877 Live 675. I am talking with Ron Sellers, and we are thinking through giving. And I am in a season of Lent and learning how to fast and to sacrifice, not to earn favor because we already have God's favor, but because I want to express my love to the Lord in a unique and different way. When we return, we'll talk more with Ron and the Giving Gap. Welcome back to Living by Faith with Trillia Newbell. I am talking with Ron Sellers, and we are talking about giving and the giving gap. And, you know, it's really interesting because we've had callers who have gone anonymous or who don't necessarily want to talk online. And I found that this is an interesting topic. One caller said that they struggle with giving to charitable organizations because that when they give, they kind of get bombarded with marketing. In other words, they start getting lots of mailers or and so they have held back from giving. That's an interesting thing, Ron. I don't know if you've heard that as a reason for people not giving, but they feel like it becomes such a marketing tool that they hold back because they are bombarded. Have you heard of anything like that keeps people from giving?
Oh, very much so. And some of what makes money such a difficult topic within the church with a capital C is the fault of the church with a capital C. It's the fault of people within the church. It is ministers who go on television or go on the radio and ask for money and then are found out to have mansions and private jets and things like that. It's ministries that play fast and loose with some of the accounting, or that do not make wise decisions, or that bombard people with begging, with requests and things like that. Now, those things, I mean, if you talk about any group of people, any industry, there are bad actors within their group. If you talk about ministers, you talk about plumbers, you talk about radio hosts, politicians, researchers, there are going to be bad actors within that group. So to me, when I look at that, yes, those bad things do happen to people, but then it also becomes very easy to use those bad things as an excuse. You don't want to give to ministries or to external organizations because you feel like you'll get bombarded. I've talked to donors and said, well, have you ever asked the ministry to take you off their email list? No, it's easier just to hit delete. Well, okay, if you haven't asked the ministry to correct the problem, then try asking the ministry, stop sending me all this stuff. And if they continue sending you all that stuff, then go find a ministry that sends you things that are relevant, that are helpful, that are useful to you, or give to your church. So, I mean, there are lots of different ways around those potholes in the road of giving. So, yes, those things do exist, but we also have to take responsibility for our own actions and say, I'm going to find a way around those things and not let that stop me from doing what God wants me to do.
Yes. You know, the Moody Publishers published a book by the Chalmers Center called When Helping Hurts. And so I encourage people to grab that book. And it's always good to vet organizations. You want to know where your money's going, how they're using it, if they're utilizing it in a way that is ethical. So those are the kinds of questions that are so important. But some of these things just take effort on our part to do that research, to contact the organization, to ask for what, for even if it's as simple as asking please do not call. I would love to give, but I don't need you to bombard me. Those are the kinds of things that I think are kind of simple, but we forget. And so I love that. One other comment that came in over the phone lines was that this person, they want to give, to their local church, but they don't like where their local church gives their money. And so that's an interesting dilemma that I don't think I've thought through to that extent. Of course, I've thought through, okay, I know that our church, they're going to give to missions, and that our church is going to give to maybe the organization that we're affiliated with, and to, of course, run and operate the church itself. But have you run into that kind of concern from people who are they do want to tithe, but they don't think that their money is going to the right thing, so they also hold back?
And I can understand that, and I have heard that from some donors. I've also heard, we actually attend a fairly wealthy church, so I don't feel like the church really needs our money. And that's fine. That's fine. I'm not going to say, well, you should give it anyways. You should give it if you don't like what they're doing with it, et cetera. But again, there are plenty of places that are not wealthy. There are plenty of Christian food banks. There are plenty of missions organizations. There are plenty of organizations, but it will require you to step out, do a little research, talk to people. And, if you're uncomfortable with where your church is giving to, then I think you also have to ask, why am I uncomfortable? If you think your church is doing something that is not scriptural with their money, then my question is, are you in the right church? If it's just a matter of, well, I really want my money to go to help, let's say, Guatemala, and they're doing missions in Nicaragua, well, okay, then you need to take a step back and say, am I really going to let something like that, again, stop me from doing what God asks me to do?
Lewis, he called in, but he was not going to get on the air. And he said that he wrote, the point of giving is to ask who is important to me. If God is important to me and everything is God's, we should be giving. Well, that's I think a good motivation. If everything is God, it's kind of like I'm going to say his name, Abram Cumter. Every square inch belongs to the Lord. I mess that up. Cumper, I can't remember. But that is the kind of idea that Lewis, the caller, is expressing, that if it's God's, then we should give, and if it is kind of going back to that, where your treasure is, your heart will be also. And that's it's one of those hard things, because I know that there's been a lot of guilt, and there's also been a lot of abuse when it comes to giving. And I want us to talk through and think through that as well. But if you have a comment or a question for Ron, give us a call, 877-548-3675 or 877-LIVE-675. We are thinking and talking about giving. And what was one of the biggest surprises from your research that you discovered?
Well, I'm not sure it was really a surprise, but it was a surprise the extent of the difference we saw in giving according to how spiritually engaged people are. Because a lot of times you will hear somebody talk about evangelicals, and you get a picture in your mind of who this is, and you sort of assume that they're all doing the same things, right? They're all doing Christian activities. Well, they're not, or they're not all doing it in the same way and with the same frequency. So we have developed something we call the spiritual engagement score, because we can't measure somebody's heart, but we can measure their actions that lead to a change of heart. So we look at how frequently they attend worship services, they read the Bible, they study the Bible, they attend small group, and they pray. And the more frequently they do this, the higher their score. And we see that people who regularly read and study the Bible, who regularly do all these things, are about twice as likely to give to charity as those who infrequently or never do these things, and they're nearly 3 times more likely to give to church. And so there is a massive and incontrovertible correlation between being more involved in the things of God and giving more, being more likely to give, and giving at a much higher proportion, too, giving more generously as a much higher proportion of income. And so, a lot of times people will ask me, well, goodness, is there really, if evangelicals are like this, why should I be an evangelical? And we've got to look at what type of evangelical they are.
Well, let's talk about that when we return. I'd love to talk about what motivates people to give. Also, what is the younger generation doing? More when we return. Welcome back to Living by Faith with Trillia Newbell. I am thinking and talking and praying about sacrifice. That's what I've been doing and what I'll be doing for the next 40 days. But as I'm thinking through it, I was thinking about giving and money, and I'm so glad to have Ron Sellers, who's been walking through us through his research, The Giving Gap. And one of the things that you mentioned is that those who are more active in spiritual practices tend to give more. And that's really fascinating to me. So my question to you is, did your research show what motivates people to give? Or would you say that is the motivation if you are in church, if you are thinking about the things of God, you are typically going to give more?
Motivations, again, are a very, very difficult thing to tease out because, again, people really don't tend to understand what motivates them to do something. There's been a lot of research on the motivations for giving, not necessarily among Christians, but in general, and they vary quite a bit. A lot of people give because they feel like they are supposed to, like they are obeying what God wants them to do. Some people give because of a little more of a prosperity gospel type of approach, which is, I want to plant the seed, and therefore I will sow God's blessings, and I'm going to give partly in order to receive. Some people give because they like the feeling that they get out of it. They feel good about themselves. They feel good about what they're doing for somebody else. Some people give because they feel like they have to. It's not what they desire to do, but it's more of an obeying of a command, whether they really want to or not. And some people give to what they personally find important. So if their family history is from the Philippines, let's say, they may want to support ministries that work in the Philippines. Or if they had a relative who spent time in prison, they might give to a prison fellowship or something along those lines. So there's a personal fulfillment that comes with that. But the reasons people give are quite varied. They're as varied as people themselves.
That makes complete sense. And I hope and pray on Living by Faith that we will get in God's word and that our motivation would be out of our love for the Lord and not because we're going to earn any favor whatsoever. It would just be an outpouring of I love Jesus, I'm going to give. and I just, looking at the example of Jesus, reading the Gospels, I do believe that we need a biblical perspective on that. And that I think we should talk about this in another show, just so that people can gain that biblical perspective and why we give. So the question I have then, or what are the implications of decreased giving for ministries and churches? Why does this even matter?
Well, I mean, every church, every ministry, every secular charity like Humane Society or whatever it may be has a cause. They have something they are trying to accomplish. And that takes money. It takes money to do whatever they're going to do. It takes money to get on the radio and talk about God. It takes money to do that on television. It takes money to print materials if you're distributing literature. It takes money to feed people. It takes money to send airplanes over with relief supplies when there's been a horrible disaster. And without the money, these things are not going to happen. Now, there's lots of ministry that can happen without money. You can take a friend to coffee and talk to her about problems that are going on in her life, or how can you help. You can volunteer your time in a zillion different ways. Church doesn't depend on big buildings and big sound systems and everything else. So there's a lot of ministry that can take place without a penny. But there's an awful lot of ministry where the reality is it takes money to do these things. And without money, they're not going to have the ability to do these things. And so that's the impact, is without money, people won't get educated, they won't get fed, the gospel won't get spread, people will not have clean water, and we'll just go on and on and on and on down the line.
And this is true. I think that's something that we just don't think about in those plain words. And I'm so grateful that you're saying it. It's true. Without money, there are a lot of things that just won't happen and won't get done. And so we ask the Lord for provision, not because, again, we will earn anything from him. The gospel satisfies all of that. Praise God for our favor before him because of Jesus, but so that we might share his good news. The disciples, they relied on the hospitality, the giving of others. They relied on the support of others. And so I think that studying God's word, we will see that this isn't something that is new in any way. There was always this sacrifice and pouring out of perfume, giving and serving others. That was just, it was the way the ministry and the mission moved forward. And so that is something I think that we neglect to remember, is that this isn't something new. It is something very old. And we can ask the Lord for help and wisdom as we are navigating and stewarding our money well. Speaking of stewardship, with our largest donor base aging, how can we raise up the next generation of faithful stewards?
Well, we did research, a study, back in 2010, 2012, something like that. And we found that the single biggest predictor of whether somebody is a donor today isn't their household income, it isn't their age, it isn't their race, their gender, it isn't their religious beliefs, it isn't their political beliefs, anything else. It's to what extent did they see their parents giving money, and did their parents talk to them about giving money? How much did they see their parents as an example? And it was a combination of those two things. It was seeing their parents in action and hearing from their parents about that action. That was by far the single biggest predictor of whether somebody would grow up to be a donor today. So long term, if people want giving to be important 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, they need to be doing this in front of their children. And again, not so like the verse that you started this whole hour with, not so that their kids will look at them and say, wow, mom and dad are really cool, they're really holy, they're really anything, but to model the behavior. And there's so much research out there, whether it's dad or mom having an affair, whether it's mom or dad being alcoholics or smoking, that shows that children raised in that environment are dramatically more likely to follow those paths themselves. And the same thing happens with giving. Children raised in an environment where their parents are demonstrating and openly talking about generosity are far more likely to end up growing up to be generous themselves. So long term, that's one of the things that can be done. Short term, that's a really good question, because young donors, have very, very different desires and expectations than do older donors. And we did a study 3 years ago, again, partnering with Infinity Concepts, called the Generation Gap, where we looked at evangelical donors under age 40 versus the donors 40 plus. And the younger donors were the only age group more likely to prefer giving overseas versus giving money domestically. They were more open to giving beyond their own local area. They were less likely to start by trusting an organization and more likely to start by doubting it and saying, now prove yourself to me. I'm not going to trust you until you do something wrong. You're guilty until proven innocent. Prove yourself to me. They were much more desirous of being varied in their giving, mixing in different organizations, learning about new organizations, wanting to spread their money around to different causes, whereas older donors tend to have gone through that stage and they have picked a few causes that they really want to concentrate on. They're also much more likely, younger donors are much more likely to give spur of the moment rather than planning out their giving in advance. So all of these things, younger donors are very, very different than our older donors. Now, the question, of course, will be, as they age, will they become more like their parents and grandparents? Or will some of these things continue to mark this generation, this young generation, as they get older?
You know, I love this, and it's all about discipleship. Maybe you are listening and you're thinking, okay, I want to give. Make this your aim. Do it. Let's give, and we'll all be giving together. I'd like to thank my guest, Ron Sellers, for joining me today. Also, thanks to the behind-the-scenes team at Moody Radio, my producer, Karen Hendren, my associate producer, Lisa Jimchi, Omar Mendoza engineering today, and Lisa on the phones. Let's hear this again. And when you do, you're going to hear it at Living by Faith, livingbyfaithradio.org, or on the Moody Radio app. You may also connect with us through social media. Living by Faith is a production of Moody Radio, a ministry of Moody Bible Institute.